Hey folks, Brenton here with RevitFamily.biz. In this video, we're going to go over all of our different single window types and their parameters and how to use them. So let's just jump right into it. The simplest family that we have is the Skylight, and it's pretty straightforward. It's going to be like any family you're used to using. If we click on it and look at its type parameters, there's not a whole lot to look at. There's all your standard stuff that we can just close those windows. All we really have is height and width, and then rough opening height and width. But if we look at it, it's pretty straightforward. Let's just change it to 6 feet tall and 2 feet wide. And then for all of you who schedule things and want to schedule the rough width and height, we have this rough opening clearance. And this is the amount of space on each side of the window that you want to have between the actual size and the rough size. So in this case, we put it at 1 1/4 inches so that the overall width and height are 2.5 inches bigger than the actual Skylight, which I think is pretty standard space when you frame, at least for my region. So we're going to leave that the way it is, but now we're just going to click OK. And there we go. The window adjusts just fine. Okay, the next one is all of our fixed windows. So we have 5 different types of fixed windows, just a regular rectangle, arched, oval, round, and semi-round. And they all function about the same, so I'm just going to click on the rectangular. And we'll introduce you to most windows function the same at this point. So I'll show you on this example window what we've got here. So in the fixed window, let's look first at type parameters. So we'll open up the type properties, and again we'll close all the areas that we don't normally store any useful parameters in. So really all we're looking at here are graphics and dimensions. So under dimensions, it's just like the Skylight. Let's just change it to a 4x6 window. Oops. And then up here under graphics, the other thing we can change is the exterior trim, the way it looks, and the interior trim. So and the mullion type. So for the exterior trim, let's change it from a simple rectangle to more of a a colonial style trim package. And then on the interior, let's change it from a traditional interior to flutes and rosettes. And then I like the mullions to be colonial, but we can change them. The other 2 options you have are horizontal or vertical. This is handy when a window gets too thin or too short that you don't want to show, so if it's too short, you don't want to show a horizontal mullion, maybe only vertical, you can switch to that. So we'll just change it to only horizontal mullions just to show you. And then we're going to click OK, and it's going to take a second and rebuild the window. And then now here you go. We can see our only horizontal mullions that we asked it for. Then we can see the trim package has gone to like a more colonial style. And then on the inside, you can see it's switched it to flutes and rosettes. Okay, so those are the type parameters. Now let's look at the instance parameters. So with the window selected, we can see, let's hide all the places we're not going to be needing so we can focus here. Okay, we'll start with just the graphics area. So you have the option to hide or show either different parts of the exterior and different parts of the interior trim. So let's just show, in this case, let's turn off the seal on the exterior side, and let's turn off the trim on the interior side. And let's click out. So what that did was on the exterior side, we just took out the seal. And this is useful when you have like a wainscoting. So often in my projects, I'll have a stone wainscot up to 3 feet to the bottom of the windows, and then above that, maybe I have like hardy board siding. And then I have a transition like a transition strip in between those two materials. And so what would happen is normally there'd be that transition strip that runs the whole length of the wall. And if I don't hide the seal trim, then it conflicts with all the window trim and it looks funny in Revit. So instead of having to try to hide the trim and then retrim out the windows manually, we can just hide the seal and then there's no conflict. So that's very useful. Then on the inside, this isn't great. Let's hide it here. We're going to hide the trim on the inside and keep the seal. So now you can see, oftentimes on the inside of a house, we don't always trim around the whole window. Like my house, maybe it's lower end house, but my house doesn't have trim around all of the windows. It has just a seal. So that's what we're accomplishing here. For anyone that's doing a project where we're not putting a trim package around the whole window, you can just show the seal. Okay, so that's the different visibility parameters for trim. Then the other thing we can do is, if we're going to turn back the colonial and go back to colonial mullions. Okay, so now we have our normal window. And if we go over here into our graphics, we can tell it how many horizontal and vertical mullions to put in. Right now what's happening is the family automatically calculates the amount of mullions, the horizontal and vertical mullions it needs, depending on changes you make in the size of the window. But if you don't like the way it's calculating them, you can override that. So if we click on the window, if it's set to 0, that means default. It's just going to do the logic that's programmed into it to pick the amount of horizontal and vertical. But if you change that from 0 to a positive number, it will override the calculation. So say for some reason we wanted, instead of 1, 2, 3, we've got 5 right now horizontal mullions, maybe we only want 4. And then vertical mullions, instead of the 4 we have, maybe we only want 3. We can override those and it'll make that change. So now you can see it's changed it. And then there's another option for craftsman style windows. So if you have a craftsman style mullion, which I do have that file opened, in the craftsman family, you can override where it puts this horizontal mullion, because right now it's calculating it's a third of the height of the window from the top. So the default offset value from the top of the window is just a third of the overall height. If you don't like that, you can manually set it to something else. So again, if it's set to 0, it'll do the default calculation. If you do anything other than 0, it will change. So let's put in 1 foot, and then it adjusts it to 1 foot. So let's hop back to our colonial windows. And let's continue going through. The next thing we have are the materials and finishes. It's just like you would think the window frame, like everything that holds the glass, that is one material, and it's just labeled window. Then you have the trim on the exterior and the trim on the interior, and then you can change the glass type. And then when you go into dimensions, your major dimensions are type parameters, so your width and your height, which we've already looked at. But if you want to make other minor tweaks, they're right here. So you can push the whole window in towards the interior if you want that option. By default, it's set to 0. Then the top trim width. Okay, so for trim packages that have this trim element above it, for instance the colonial, we also do this on the craftsman style, there's this option you can change the height of that, the thickness. So right now it's set to 10. If we want it to be a foot, we can do that, and you'll see it adjusts to be a little bit taller. Same with the width of the trim around the window. So right now it's set to 5 inches. If we want it something crazy like 8 inches, we can do that. And you can see it just got much wider around the window. You can change the thickness. If you want it to be like 4 inches thick, you could do that. And you can see it pops out more. And you can make all of those same changes to the interior trim as well. And that is just about all the parameters for that particular window. The rest of the windows all function the same. These grouped windows all function the same. You can change each window type. In fact, we'll get to that in just a second. Let's continue on with our single windows. So the only other added parameters would be in these operable windows, and that has to do with how they show up in plan and elevation. So if we go to a plan, we can see our operable windows. Oops, I clicked the wrong one. Okay, so you can see here's our awning, here's our double hung, here's our slider, our double casement, and then our folding doors. So if you go into one of these, let's say the casement window, and now we look under graphics, there are 2 extra parameters. One is show, actually there's 3. There's 2 parameters to show the visibility of the motion symbols. So in this case it's a door swing. You can change whether that's visible or not visible in plan view and elevation. So if I shut it off in plan view, you can see that swing symbol disappears. So some people don't like to show the motion symbols in plan view. And then likewise, if we go to an elevation view, right now we're showing the swing symbol, and you can shut that off if you'd like. So now it doesn't show the swing symbol. And then the last parameter, new parameter that isn't in the other families, is the swing angle. So if you change that to say 45, it will change the plan symbol the way it swings. So you could do 90, 45, or keep it at 30, which is the default value. And that's about it. We don't want to save the project. The next major change in the way the window functions is here in the grouped windows. So let's just take a look at one of the most complicated ones, which is 5 windows and 5 separate transoms. So we're going to click on that, and I'm going to give you a real quick tour. First of all, you'll notice there aren't really any instance parameters here. These are all going to be type parameters, because pretty much anytime you make major changes to this window, it's going to probably be a type change. So we're just going to click in here. Also, I did that because if you make instance parameters on a window that is this complicated, it has a tendency to take a lot of time. Because what happens is if I go over here and I want to change a material, I'll change the material, and then it makes you wait, because it's going through a bunch of logic to see if it can apply that material. And then if it can, it thinks through everything and all the different implications that change will make on the window. And it does all that thinking before it'll let you make the next change to the next parameter. So it takes some time to sit there and mess with the parameters. But if you put them all as type parameters, it doesn't make you wait between parameter changes. It'll let you do all your changes, and then when you click OK, it will do all the logic to see if it can make the window. So it saves a little bit of time. That's why all of the parameters for these grouped windows are all going to be type parameters. All right, so let's look at what we have here. Okay, it's a lot to take in. There's a lot of parameters. You can see how long this list is, and it's because all of the parameters we just went through for the individual single windows, you have all of those same parameters, but for each window. So in this case, you can see there's 10 windows here, 5 on the bottom and then 5 transoms. So there's parameters for 10 windows in here. So to help make things easier and more navigable, you'll see I've used this category called sets. Normally, I don't use that category. Normally, the only categories I use when I organize parameters for you guys is I only use graphics, materials and finishes, and dimensions. Everything else isn't really meant for you guys to mess with because I don't want to put things in weird places and make you search around to find the parameter you need. But in this case, I've added another category which is called set, and that's where I've put all of the settings for the transoms. So if we expand that, you can see I've also tried to organize these by transom. So all of the parameters for transom 1 are in this area, and then it goes to transom 2, and then there are all of transom 2's parameters, and it goes all the way to 5. And the way I've done this is if you are looking at the exterior of the building and you're looking at the window, it just goes from left to right. So this is transom 1 all the way to transom 5 on the right. Window 1 is on the left, window 5 is on the right. So that's how these are organized. So if you look in here, you have all of the same parameters that we just went through for the single windows, and then you have this extra parameter on the top that says transom 1 type. And what it means is you can pick the window type that goes in here. So right now we have a fixed window, but you could easily change it to, say, an awning window, and then you can pick if it has colonial mullions, horizontal or vertical mullions. And if you don't want any mullions, you can just click off show mullions, and that would hide the mullions. Right? So I think it's self-explanatory. We're not going to go through all of these parameters because we've already done it for the single windows. Just know that you can control each one of these 10 windows separately by going into these type parameters. So like I said, all of the transoms are under set. If you don't want to change a transom, go to graphics, and these are all your windows. And then at the end of the windows, after window 5, there's a category that's overall graphics. This is where you would change the trim style on the exterior or interior, as well as the visibility for the trim. And then everything else is exactly where you would imagine. You can change the materials under the materials category, and then here in dimensions, you have more dimensions than you'd normally see in just the single windows. So this also, from top to bottom, goes from left to right. So the width for window and transom 1 is right here, and then it goes then it shows you the space between window 1 and window 2. So that's this little sliver of space. You can change that. All right, so it goes from window 1 to window 5, and then there's 4 different spaces in between. Then when you move from the widths, you've got your heights. So here's your transom height. So how tall do you want that transom window to be? Then underneath that is the space between the transom and the window below. So this. So we're just going from top to bottom. And then you have the height of the window. Then under that, you have all of your trim dimensions, the exterior trim dimensions and the interior trim dimensions that we've already gone over on the single windows. Then your inset, and then your rough opening clearances. So that is a full tour of the windows. So I'm going to make some caveats, or I'm going to make some declarations. I don't know what you want to call it, but these windows are infinitely more complicated than the single windows, as you can imagine. One, there's just so many more parameters because you multiply everything by the amount of new windows that you've put in the group. And plus, these families are nested inside this grouped family. So it's another layer of logic Revit has to go through. So these can take some time to regenerate the window once you've changed the parameters. It's not a long time. I think maybe 30 seconds at max, 30, maybe 40 on this really big one that's got 10 windows in it. So we're not talking a lot, but it might be more time than you're used to. These families change almost instantly. These families take a little more time. So I just want to do that disclaimer to let you know. Okay, the last main item we can go over are the included trim families that are their own standalone family. And I've included these because in the case where we don't have a window that suits you, which I hope hardly ever happens or never happens, in that case where there needs to be a different window that either you make, or maybe there's a group of windows that we don't have, maybe you want 6 windows in a row, in that case we still wanted you to have the option to easily match all the other windows that we've made. So if you make a new window, or you have a new group or a unique group of windows on a project, you can still place all the individual windows you want, and then you can just shut off their trim. Then you have the option to stretch these trims as big as you want, or around whatever other item you want on your project, and you can still assemble a group of windows that matches all of these others. So basically what you see is kind of what you get. We've given you all the versions of each of the different styles. So that's just there for you as an extra bonus in case what we've already created isn't enough. And I think that's about it. That concludes like the full in-depth tour of how to use all of the families. If you have questions or concerns, let me know. Thank you for using our families, and I'll see you in the next video.